When we first arrived, the plane came into Cameron Bay, and the plane was full. There must have been 100 of us, and just about everybody was individual replacements, so there was no units. Excuse me. And they had a runway, then they had barracks, and the sand was white, and it was so deep that they laid down that metal track they used to land aircraft, and that's where you walked around. You had to stay on the metal track because the sand was so fine you sink in the sand. And the whole thing was sand, and I never forget, over on one corner of it they had empty artillery casings, and there must have been thousands of them, and it was brass, and I suppose they brought it back through there and recycled or whatever, but it was hot. It was really, really hot. And then they assigned us to a barracks and said we'd be there a day or two. And some people shipped the same day, and like I say, it was a day or two. And then you had to go through customs, because I remember I had a little bottle of vodka I got on the airplane, before I got on the airplane, because you weren't allowed to take booze. And when you go through customs, they took everything away from you. And you didn't have pictures, you didn't have anything. And then you had just your equipment, and you went and got in this barracks, and then they told you when they were going to try to ship you. And then, like I told you earlier, when they were going to ship me up to Pleiku, which was in the Central Islands, and they had to cancel because they had incoming on the runway, so they couldn't get. I think there was 3 of us, and they couldn't get us in. And then a day or two after that, we flew up in a C-130 and landed in Pleiku. The sun was shining. The guards were either sleeping or bathing out there in the sun, and it was just like a big resort. And then from there, you went to your individual units, and I was about 4 or 5 miles from the Air Force, on Artillery Hill. And then the other 2, I think one went to 4th Division, and I don't know where the other one went. But and I was replacing. Matter of fact, I was replacing a guy from South Dakota by the name of Smitty, and he was getting ready to go home. So it didn't feel that great, I'll tell you. He was going home, and I was just coming. But
we lived in sandbag huts, and they were you had to stoop down to get into them and bend over because they weren't very high, because they had to be lower than what the gun would shoot over the top of. So they'd be probably as high as the parapet that the gun was surrounded by, because they were always built right next to the guns, and they were probably not over probably about 3 foot high on the inside. So you'd kind of bend over and crawl into them. But they were sandbag walls, sandbag ceilings, and we had cots, so it's mosquito nets, and help keep the mosquitoes and the rats off.
Yeah, a couple of times, we were walking along the trail, and next thing you know, they open up on you, and your first instinct is to hit the ground and find cover and find out where they were and return fire. The first time it happened, when we were following a blood trail where they had told us that there was some wounded in the Indian area, and we were checking it out, and we come under fire, and they were lobbing grenades down on it. That's why I got my first Purple Heart, because shrapnel was going everywhere, and I got hit in the leg. And but we called up for reinforcements to come and help us out, and we fought them off for a while until we got reinforcements, and then they were gone. One of the things that after we went into a place called Ashaw Valley, and it was a heavy concentration of enemy there, and there was we suffered a lot of casualties in Ashaw Valley. We were bivouacked on a hill. I remember it was a well-known hill too, but I can't remember the name of it. And we would go down, we would leave the hill and march down. I remember this distinctly because I said, boy, this is not good. We marched down the valley, and one thing about, we were out of water, we had to go down and get water. And they marched our whole platoon down there, single file. And we got to the bottom of the hill, they opened up on us. And man, I tell you what, that was a bloody battle. That was a lot of guys got killed in that skirmish. Yeah, I was fortunate that I didn't, but I think 3 or 4 guys in my squad got killed. And out of the platoon, that was about 30% casualties in that skirmish. There were so many dead that each guy that walked out of there had to carry a body out or drag, however you get it out. And we got back up to the hill and they put them in body bags. And
it's kind of hard to imagine if you haven't done it. You know, it's not like the movies at all. It's like the old cowboy movies. You really can't hear bullets whiz over your head. I always thought that was a myth, but you can hear them. And I mean, it depends on your environment. If you were in a village or something like that, you'd try to identify which hut or building or structure it was coming from, and focus your attention on that. If you're out in the jungle, you knew about where it was coming from, but you don't normally see individual targets or things of that nature. And it's mass confusion. I think Eisenhower said in World War II, the best prepared battle plan isn't worth a damn once the first round is fired. And it's pretty much true. You know, you got to remember, we're 1819, I think well trained. You come in on a helicopter. I was a lot skinnier then, maybe 150, 60 pounds. You got a steel helmet and a rifle, 80 pounds of gear. The helicopters want to get out of there because they're big targets. And they hover, and you never know. That elephant grass might be 2 feet deep or 8 feet deep. So they hover, and you start jumping off the sides, and you go down, your pack twists, you fall over, you lose your helmet, you drop your rifle, you get up, get yourself collected, and you're supposed to be moving on line, and you can't see the guy on either side of it. You can hear the bullets digging off the helicopters and whipping the elephant grass over your head, and so you just keep moving in what you hope is the right direction. And ultimately, somehow it works out, and everybody gets to the right place, usually. But when you're going in on a helicopter, and you don't know what's going to be down there, that's when you got really the butterflies. They'd always what they call prep the LZs. He always had an M60 machine gun on each side. And usually we'd go in a Diamond 4 ship. They'd come in, and the minute you got down on the ground, the machine guns would start raking the whole horizon just in case anything was out there. So, I mean, you're going in, the helicopters are loud, 4 helicopters banging and chopping, guys jumping off, you know, and 8 machine guns ripping around. So it's pretty noisy and chaotic when you first go in.
I don't really remember too much about the actual work other than that we had to improvise a lot. We were given a lot of, you know, IV antibiotics, starting a lot of IVs, and that's what a lot of our work days were, just, you know, IV fluids, IV antibiotics, changing dressings, you know, and writing letters for the GIs, feeding them, you know, bathing them, talking to them, listening to them. 3rd Surgical Hospital, and mostly the post-op ward. If they needed extra help in the pre-op ward, you know, if they had a lot of casualties that came in, we would go to the pre-op ward too. And sometimes you work night and day, depending on the number of casualties that came in. It was not rare to go over 12 hours, but they tried. I mean, they had us on shifts, and they tried not to let us go over 12 hours. I was 2nd lieutenant when I first went in, and I made 1st lieutenant relatively fast, and one of the reasons was because I was working in a major role, supervising the post-op ward until they got a major there, and I guess that's why they gave me the rank. I don't know, but anyway, I deserved it.
Reminder of home. And that's really what our job was. It's a reminder of home. It's to remember the girlfriend. It's to remember the sister, the cousin, the girl they went to high school with. The reason they're there, you know, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for their country. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting for democracy. Who represents that? You know, they're tired of seeing the guy, you know, they've been fixing that vehicle with, or that they've been walking out in the jungle with. They want something different. And that was the purpose. So we had the recreation center. The other part of the program was we made up these portable recreation programs that lasted about an hour. And in an ideal world, we traveled to maybe 5 or 6 units, either on a landing zone, fire bases, out in the field, maybe even around a base camp. It varied. It depended on the unit you were with. When I transferred to Camp Eagle, which is the home of the 101st, which was Air Mobile, and had a lot of helicopters available, we got out a lot. So you made these programs, and say your subject was sports. Again, young men love sports. So let's say football. So you took flash cards, you made up these cards, and you held up a city. So you said Baltimore, and they yelled out Colts. And right there, we've dated ourselves. And then the second activity, maybe you named quarterbacks and what team they had to do. Another popular one was questions and answers. Who won Super Bowl III? And not only did they have to get the right answer, but you had to get it on a board and maybe make tic-tac-toe out of it. So you divided the men into 2 teams. Well, they got so engrossed in the game, they would forget where they are. They would forget their problems for an hour. And that was the purpose. And they did get engrossed. They would trip each other. They would steal the board so that even if the other team had the answer, they couldn't put it on the board because the board wasn't there to put it on. And I mean, again, remember, they don't have television. You know, we were treated very nicely. I mean, you cannot imagine how many pulled out pictures. Anybody who had a girl or a woman with short dark hair, I was her. I mean, it didn't matter if she was tall, short, fat, thin, black, white, Asian, whatever. Short dark hair, I became that woman. You know, the gals with long blonde hair, same concept. And overall, no, I think when you consider the environment and everything else, for the most part, a lot of them were timid. You know, it was like, oh my God, it's a woman. What do I say? What do I do? And once you might have visited a unit, like the ideal was to visit a unit once a week. And they got to know you more. You know, you could visit, you could talk, they could say, oh, do you know what we have to do this week for inspection? Can you believe the Army is that stupid? Because we were an ear to listen. And it's a lot easier to tell it to someone than write a letter. Or, relaying a story. Sometimes it was a sad story. I mean, you went back, someone wasn't there. That was the hardest part.
Out in these villages, it was a lot of skin problems, a lot of things like TB, plague, all kinds of medical problems that you would treat. And if you could, you would get some of them back to Quin Yon, and they'd be seen there. You'd come in and you'd look over at the land, and here would be these palm trees and this white beach, and it just looked great. And then when you get close enough, you'd realize they use the beach for their toilet. And so, I mean, things looked good from a distance, but up close it was relatively grim. One interesting medcap, there was a leprosarium down the coast from us, and of course most of us had never seen leprosy before. But we went down there quite frequently, and minor surgery and things like that. And it was a beautiful place. That was one of the cleanest places in Vietnam, and the houses were well kept up, and it was nice to go there. And they had, there was still a Catholic priest there, and several Vietnamese nuns were there running this leprosarium. And I remember one day I was just chatting with one of them, and the hills around this place were full of EC. And They stayed away in the daytime when we were there, but at nighttime, when we were gone, they came down into the village and took over, essentially. And if you gave them antibiotics or something, I'm sure the VC took a major portion of those for themselves. But I asked this nurse, I said, I don't know how this is going to work out, which side is going to come out on top. I said, I suppose it really won't make any difference to you. You'll just go on with your job and task, and boy, she let me have it. She'd lost her whole family in Hue. Everybody else in the family had been killed by the Vietnamese communists. And so, I mean, she had given everything. The only thing she had was this calling as a nurse.
The most remarkable story that I had was because we were there on December 31st, we were in one of the hotels downtown that's sort of was a famous hotel. I honestly cannot remember the name. But we decided that we were going to go down, this is New Year's Eve, we were going to go down and have a drink. So we were down in the restaurant in the bar area, and we were having our celebratory New Year's Eve together, and there were 4 of us, and we all of a sudden there was somebody shot off firecrackers outside. Obviously other people who celebrated New Year's Eve in that fashion, and this is the New Year's Eve that's celebrated in the Western world. And the person who was at the desk, the clerk, reacted to the firecrackers by putting his hands over his head like this and screaming, "VC! VC! VC!" and ducking under the desk. And we were just speechless, because that was his reaction to fireworks, that the Viet Cong was in fact bombing outside the hotel. So that was a remarkable, heart-stopping kind of.
"1975, fall of Saigon, bombs are going off all over. There's chaos. My grandmother was dying of tuberculosis, knew that she had to get me out of the country, picked me up. I remember riding on the back of a motorcycle, with a guy and her, and we went to my brother's school to pick him up. When we got there, though, I remember standing at the gates screaming for him because the school was just rubble. There was nothing there. So I'm screaming for my brother. My grandmother is yelling at me, get back on the motorcycle, get back on, he's not here." And I remember trying to weave through traffic. There's just chaos, and there's bombs, and everybody's screaming. And she took me to a orphanage, Catholic orphanage, and turned me over to the nuns, and pretty much said goodbye. And I remember walking home with the nun that night to her apartment, walking over rubble and hopping and skipping, not really knowing what's going on, kind of oblivious to it, but yet knowing it's kind of weird. Thought it was a new excitement, adventure, And then the next day, they put all of us kids on a bus, and as the bus was pulling away, it's kind of like a movie scene. My grandmother pulls up, and she's running after the bus, trying to hand me a bag of food. I'm leaning out the window screaming for her, and she's running after the bus, and never caught up with me. And we got to the airport and got on a plane, and I remember going up to the plane. It was like a C-130, just a carrier, and looking back, and it was just, the whole airstrip was just full of women and kids, and women are just handing their kids to whomever will take them. I looked back and just saw women crying and kids crying. It was just chaos, and women just shoving their kids to whomever's getting on the plane. And we sat on the plane, and there were no seats, it was just a carrier, so we sat on the floor, all of us huddling now. Okay, now I'm scared. And they did have, I guess, helpers there. And I remember going to the bathroom, and we went through some turbulence, and I was so scared I couldn't get out of the bathroom, so they had to try to break down the door to get me out. Then we landed in the Philippines and stayed in the shelter there, the big air hangar, and it was just empty with just tons of people just laying all over, all of us kids. And they lined us up, boys on one line, girls on another line, and as we walked through this line and past this table, they handed us out a name card. And that's how I got the name Susan. My original name was Tweed, Winty Tweed. And so thank goodness I could have been like a Gertrude or a Mildred or something. But I got the name Susan, and we had to wear it around our neck. Got back on the plane, and we landed somewhere else that was nice and warm. And I really don't remember much more after that until I got sent to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I was taken in by a foster family and stayed with them for a couple months. And then my adopted parents they were both in the military, and met over in Vietnam, came back to the States, got married, and were actually on their honeymoon. And they had decided they wanted to adopt a Vietnamese child. They didn't care, boy, girl, what age. And they were on their honeymoon and got a phone call that there's a 7-year-old girl ready for adoption. Do they want her? They had 5 minutes to decide. And they said, yep, we'll take her. And sight unseen. So they packed up their stuff. They were vacationing in Montana. Packed up their stuff, drove down to Colorado and picked me up. And he was still in the military, so we traveled. I was very fortunate to be able to travel the whole world again with my father. When we got flown over, all my records, who my mother was, my birth record, maybe who my father was, all my personal stuff was put on a plane that was before mine, and that one got shot down. So I came here. I don't even know my birth date. I don't know the day I was born, and I was talking to some of my friends last night about it, and it's like, how everyone knows their birthday. Everyone knows the day they're born, and I don't. I'll never be able to find out. That's why I don't read horoscopes. It just doesn't do any good for me.
Departure is the same as coming in. And went through the replacement depot when you're processing out, got on the airplane, and we were taking off. Again, flying back to Japan and then back to Seattle. What really struck me is that when you take off, there's the obligatory celebration that you're leaving. And so people are hooting and hollering and cheering and what have you. And again, I was sitting close to the front of the airplane. Well, to make sure things didn't get out of hand, I stood up and walked the aisle and made sure everybody was calm. Fasten your safety belts. Working with the stewardess to make sure that everybody would behave themselves. As walking through the airplane, what really struck me, there were empty seats. When I went over, the plane was full. When I come back, there were empty seats. And remember walking up to the front of the airplane, and I was going to ask the question, why are there empty seats? And I didn't, and I sat down, and finally just said, hey, this is really a stupid question. Because again, the person worked with was with grave registration. We knew all these bodies were going back. And that's when it really struck me, that there was a heck of a high cost to this. I came over in an airplane full, went home on an airplane that wasn't full. Those people either died or were evacuated early. So that really comes down into a shock of it. It really wasn't until my second tour into Thailand when I was, again, logistical support. And that was for the refugee relief out of Cambodia, Laos, U.S. forces in Thailand, that received a letter from, in the meantime I had gotten married, and received a letter from my wife that the local school had closed down because they didn't have fuel. This would be 72, 73. And yet watching all the B-52s take off and the same, we're just burning up an enormous amount of natural resources here. But yet there was a school in Iowa that was closed because they didn't have money enough or didn't have fuel to heat the building. And it was like, this is really stupid.
our son, up until recently, we always ask, well, what do you remember about your dad coming back home? Because we went to meet him at the Offutt, or Omaha Air Force, or Air Base. No, airport, that's it. And we went there, and people were kind of strange at that time. And Doug was told not to wear his uniform home because sometimes there would be problems. Well, he told them that he would wear his uniform back. He fought for it. He had a right to be proud of it. So he comes in, and the kids all looked, and being that he was so skinny and so green looking, they almost didn't recognize him. But when he came up and he talked with them and he hugged me, and they kind of sat there and looked, and it took us a while before we walked down the area to go out, and people started calling him names and spitting on him and telling him he was dirt. And my boy, he just 7 years old, or by that time he was 8. Why are they doing that, Mom? Daddy didn't do nothing to them. And it's hard to explain to an 8-year-old what's wrong with people. And up until about 5 years ago, that was the thing he remembered of his dad coming home.